Howdy there, folks. Josh McCarthy with Cowboys of the Cross here again. So, continuing on in our series here, I wanted to talk a little bit about something that's been going on in the news lately. We've been hearing a lot about this conflict over in Ukraine with Russia and everything going on there, and so it brings up some questions about how a Christian is to view war and fighting and all that kind of stuff. And um, so, I want to say from the onset that there's a lot of differing views in Christian circles with this kind of stuff. There's people that believe that Christians shouldn't be involved in any type of war anywhere. And then you got people on the other side that are about ready to jump headlong into any conflict at any time without thinking of the consequences. And so I just want to say at the start that this is going to be my opinion, trying to discern what I see in the Word, and that we can agree to disagree on this, and it's not a make or break or salvation issue or anything like that. So we shouldn't be um, not getting along with fellow believers, even if they disagree with us on this issue. So I want to start with a passage in Matthew that says, Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." So I want to go into this with this mindset of loving your neighbor as yourself. I've heard like an example about if you're in a fight with somebody, it might be the right thing to not fight back or something like that. But if you see somebody else getting beat up in a back alley somewhere, if you're really loving your neighbor in that instance, you would get involved and stop the attacker and defend your neighbor in that instance. But we need to remember that when it comes to war and conflict in the Christian era we're in, we don't have an explicit command. The Old Testament had different wars with Israel where God was directly involved, God was directly commanding them to go to war, to not go to war, or anything like that. But in the Christian time we're in the New Testament time, we don't have that, where we don't have God commanding Christians or anything like that to go to war or not go to war or whatever. So we need to use wisdom and discernment and look at what the scripture says about such things as we can. The first thing we need to recognize is that not all killing is murder. The Bible has a strict command against murder in the Ten Commandments, and beforehand, even in Genesis 9, God talks to Noah and he says, "If you shed man's blood, by man's blood shall yours be shed." It's this idea of capital punishment. So if you kill somebody in premeditated murder, the just punishment for that would be your death. And so that would be dealt out later on. We find out in the New Testament era, in Romans 13, it talks about the sword being given to the government. So that would be dealt out by the government. That's the government's job, is to punish the evildoer and uphold the righteous. So the government has that responsibility of putting murderers to death. We could get into a whole long conversation about that, but that's kind of what I'll touch on there. So we need to remember that not all killing is murder. There are just killings. Like I said, capital punishment being an example of that. So again, using wisdom, we then can draw these conclusions that if a government is defending its citizens and defending its nations, that not all killing would be murder. And that would roll into things such as war and conflict. Christian fathers and a lot of smarter people than me have kind of come up with what they call the just war theory, to discern what is a appropriate use of force for a government and what is not. And we need to remember that the church and the government are not the same thing. The government is a separate entity with its responsibilities before God. The church has a responsibility to speak to the government with words of wisdom and things like that, but they are not the same things. The people involved can all be Christians, though. So you can have Christian leaders in your government and Christian leaders in your military And I think you should, because we should be evangelizing everybody. So our whole goal is to get everybody to be a Christian, right? So that would involve things like the military and the government and people in the state also. So we need to remember those things when we think about things like war and conflict. So this principle, this just war theory principle, is derived from these scriptures of loving your neighbor, of understanding that life is to be, um, life is sacred, life is to be protected by by the ruling authorities. That is the ruling authorities' job, is to protect those people in their nation. And so the first point of this just war theory is that a war should only be declared after all other diplomatic diplomatic ways or paths of peace have been exhausted. So everything else has to be tried first before you decide to raise arms against another nation. And also, we also need to remember that the goal is defensive war. It's a just cause. So we're not going out and conquering new territory. We're not going out to. I've heard somebody use the example that if America wanted Canada's trees, so they declared war on Canada, go invade Canada and take their trees, that would be an unjust war, because that would be an aggressive war. Um, Also, the next point is that a war needs to be declared openly and by an appropriate sound authority. So somebody, if say, for example, America has Congress, Congress needs to be in sound mind to declare that war. They need to be um, sane. You can't have some crazy dictator going in and deciding, well, I want the whole world and I want to take over this and take over that. That would be unjust war. Um, so also it must have, like I said, just intentions. It has to be, like I said, defensive or for justice, not for personal gain. And also, the aim of the war must be a just peace. The whole idea is that the peace after that war must be better than the peace would have been had that war not happened. And obviously, you can't see the future, you can't know exactly how things are going to go, but you must have that goal in mind. A governing authority must have that, has that responsibility to weigh these things out, to look at it thoroughly before they decide to go to war. Or um, in the case of an example, Ukraine, the war was brought to them, so they have that right and responsibility to defend their citizens, loving their neighbor, and so they aren't going and invading Russia. Russia's the one invading them, so they have the right and responsibility to do that, to defend that country as best as they can. And we also need to remember that while there are principles for declaring a war or going into a war, there are also principles we need to remember when it comes to fighting in that war. Principles like acknowledging combatants versus civilians. Civilians should not be killed, civilians should be protected. Um, don't go bomb a bunch of hospitals, kind of that kind of a thing. Or if you have enemy combatants that surrender to you, you don't just kill all of them. You take them in, you feed them, you give them the basic necessities that you would anybody in that instance. Or, like, I've heard another example where, if, say, you're a Christian soldier and your commanding officer says, well, I don't want to deal with all these prisoners right now, so why don't you just go kill them? Well, that Christian soldier would then have the responsibility to disobey his governing authority and protect the lives of those prisoners. Um, and we also, like I said, the justice after the war needs to be established. It needs to be a peaceful ending to the war. It can't just go on and on and drag on for who knows however long. I mean, we haven't seen any of those lately, I know. But the rulers need to be wise when it comes to any type of conflict and anything like that. And so we need to remember these principles as we think about any conflict we see on the news, or if you're a Christian that's in the military, when it comes to how you fight. We don't act like the world. We are called to be in the world but not a part of it. And so we are going to be in the world and involved in these things, and these things are going to go on and on until Jesus returns, and we're going to have to use wisdom and discernment when it comes to any type of conflict like this. And like I say, there's more to this than I can ever get into here. So I might make a blog post about it on the website later or something eventually. Just keep your eyes on that maybe down the pike. But yeah, like I say, there's a lot more we can dig into this. Please like and subscribe to the videos, share them on Facebook or social media, or send them to your friends. Help us to get this content out, and help us evangelize the cowboy community, and to help us all be doers of the word. So, all right, we'll catch you later. Adios.